Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys by Jawanza Kunjufu. Copyright 1985 by Jawanza Kunjufu. Dedication. This book is dedicated to my sons, Shikamana, which means he who holds things together, and Walker. Shikamana and Walker, you continue to inspire me, and I commit my life to your development. Special thanks. Special thanks are given to Eugene Winslow, Levert King, Sanyika and Wise, Eugene Perkins, Kalamu Yasalam, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Maria Filson for their editorial assistance. July 5th, 1982. Introduction. Among the animal and bird kingdoms, there are certain species classified as endangered by the Department of Interior. This label has been assigned to these species because they are becoming scarce due to adverse environmental conditions and the insatiable greed of man to hunt and destroy them for so-called sporting pleasures. Indeed, these species would soon become extinct if it were not for certain laws and protective measures to ensure their survival. However, endangered species are not limited to the animal and bird kingdoms. In America, and other nations for that matter, many humans fall under this same category, but this should not come as a revelation. Human life has always been expendable in a world that is bent on violence and war, and which ignores the social and physical needs of many of its inhabitants. And there is no greater example of this human neglect than in the case of black children or African and African American children. Jawanza Kunjufu elaborates on this travesty to describe how Europeans, specifically European Americans, have conspired to destroy African Americans by damaging the lives of African American boys. Brother Jawanza chooses to concentrate on the destruction of African American boys because he feels that the African American male poses the greatest threat to white supremacy. For it is during their childhood that the system of American racism and oppression begins to cripple African American males so that when they reach adulthood, they are socially, physically, and politically impotent. Although the reader may question his emphasis on African American boys over African American girls, one cannot easily dismiss the fact that European Americans have done nearly everything imaginable to malign and subjugate African American males. In his commentary, Brother Jawanza describes how African American boys are systematically programmed for failure so that when they become adults, they pose little danger to the status quo. By their control of key social institutions, European Americans have denied the African American boy the fruits of his heritage, culture, and rites of passage. As a result, the African American boy becomes the bearer of social maladies which he carries with him into adulthood. This early seasoning is described by Sekou Touré, president of Guyana, as the science of dehumanization which signals the first stage of the conspiracy. Brother Jawanza cites the public school as being the most flagrant institution which contributes to the destruction of African American boys. This destruction can be clearly observed during the 4th grade when many African American boys begin to exhibit signs of intellectual retrogression. Unfortunately, most never recover, and as a result, a disproportionate number of African American students find themselves ill-prepared to survive in a racist educational system. However, Brother Jawanza feels that a strong principle, an aroused and concerned community, and positive role models can do much to change this disparaging situation. He suggests that more African American male teachers be assigned to the primary grades because it is during the formative years that children shape their values and begin to identify with role models. But the public school ignores this fact and does little to encourage males to teach in the primary grades. The author is also highly critical of the macho syndrome which permeates this society. Many African American men seem to be mesmerized by this chauvinistic quality. In their efforts to compensate for certain weaknesses, they become strong advocates of the macho syndrome, displaying it as though it was a badge of honor. African American boys must be taught that masculinity is not measured by the size of one's biceps or sexual powers, but is a quality that is characterized by being affectionate, sincere, and responsible. Brother Jawanza also stresses the importance of a strong family unit as being the foundation for the positive development of African American children. Despite its weakness, the black family unit should not be perceived as being an anemic institution. Contrary to what we are led to believe, there are strengths in this unit that need to be considered in programming for African American children. Although the picture which Brother Jawanza depicts is not a glamorous one, it is not etched in stone. The author makes it unmistakably clear that something can be done to correct the dehumanization of African American children. He understands, and quite correctly, that all too often the African American community accepts its problems as being insurmountable. The system of racism and oppression is designed to foster this type of passive resignation. However, Brother Jawanza does not leave the reader with a sense of hopelessness. He offers many examples of what can be done to ensure that African American boys grow up to be strong, committed, and responsible African American men. But he does warn us that unless we seriously respond to the true needs of African boys, the future of African Americans is indeed bleak and destined to follow the path of other endangered species. Brother Jawanza should be commended for this insightful work. As a long-time advocate for African American children, he has distinguished himself as a scholar and practitioner. Now he has synthesized these two disciplines and provided us with a commentary that should be read by everyone who is concerned about African American children, the seeds of our destiny and ultimate liberation. Eugene Perkins. The Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. Quote, solving the problems of black boys may eliminate the problems of future men. End quote. To use the word conspiracy, which is an act of plotting together to harm someone, to describe certain aspects of our society, is a strong indictment of the social fabric of this country. The conspiracy to destroy black boys is very complex and interwoven. There are many contributors to the conspiracy, ranging from the very visible, who are more obvious, to the less visible and silent partners who are more difficult to recognize. Those people who adhere to the doctrine of white racism, imperialism, and white male supremacy are easier to recognize. Those people who actively promote drugs and gang violence are active conspirators and easier to identify. What makes the conspiracy more complex are those people who do not plot together to destroy black boys, but, through their indifference, perpetuate it. This passive group of conspirators consists of parents, educators, and white liberals who deny being racist, but through their silence allow institutional racism to continue. First, let's return to the more obvious white racism, imperialism, and white male supremacy. Frances Welsing, in her article, The Crest Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism, states, Racism is viewed as a global behavior power system with a constant and specific set of power relationships. Racism evolved with the singular goal of white supremacy or white power domination by the global white minority over the vast non-white global majority. This colored global collective has been forced into the position of relative powerlessness compared to the global white collective, establishing the power equation of white over non-white. Racism, whether consciously or unconsciously, evolved as a survival necessity for the tiny global white minority due to their genetic recessive status as albino variants, mutants, in a world of skin color genetically dominant black, brown, red, and yellow peoples. Indeed, had the global white minority not evolved this specific system of power relationship, whites over non-whites, wherein whites control all of the behavior activity of non-whites in all areas of people activity, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, as a survival mechanism, in the presence of the genetically dominant colored world majority, the mutant albino genetic recessive minority would find itself genetically annihilated. That is, there would be no more white people except for the new mutations to albinism produced by skin melanated or colored peoples. Thus, to prevent the genetic annihilation of skin whiteness, a behavior power system was evolved, the power system of racism or white supremacy domination. Men initiate the act of reproduction, therefore. If a population is fearful of its genetic annihilation, it only has to focus on the men of the annihilating population. When you consider an African man, African woman, European man, and European woman, there are 4 possible heterosexual combinations, but only one will produce a child with a similar genetic makeup to Europeans. African man and African woman equals dominant genes. African man and European woman equals dominant genes. European man and African woman equals dominant genes. European man and European woman equals recessive genes. We must now expand our description of racism to specify imperialism and white male supremacy. Cecil Rhodes, in his article Confession of Faith, provides the historical blueprint. I contend that we are the finest race in the world, and that the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race. Just fancy those parts that are at present inhabited by the most despicable specimens of human beings. What an alteration there would be if they were brought under Anglo-Saxon influence. Look again at the extra employment a new country added to our dominion gives. I contend that every acre added to our territory means in the future of birth to some more of the English race. Why should we not form a secret society with but one object, the furtherance of the British Empire and the bringing of the whole uncivilized world under British rule? Poverty is better under our flag than wealth under a foreign one. Africa is still lying ready for us. It is our duty to seize every opportunity of acquiring more territory, and we should keep this one idea steady before our eyes, that more territory simply means more of the Anglo-Saxon race. More of the best, of the most human, most honorable race this world possesses. Holly Sklar, in the book Trilateralism, notes, very few women have been admitted into elite planning circles. There are virtually no women in the inner circles. Women were not admitted to the Council on Foreign Relations until 1970. No women serve as chief executive officers, and only a handful have reached high positions in the corporations related to the Trilateral Commission. Secondly, let's look at a more subtle form of the conspiracy. Institutional racism. The chapter on the 4th grade failure syndrome will look at the conspiracy contributions of parents, educators, and the streets. 2 college graduates with identical grade point averages and majors who were roommates during their 4 years apply for the same position with an employer. The African American graduate is interviewed first and is told by the European employer the position has either been filled or he is not appropriate for the position. Upon leaving the employer's office, he motions to his European friend to leave, based on the information he received. The other graduate decides, just for the experience, he would like to be interviewed, and secures the position. The European graduate did not make the final decision, nor did he deny the benefit his racial position affords him. Taking advantage of a situation, whether in employment, housing, or other opportunities, is playing a passive role in the conspiracy by perpetuating institutional racism. I chose to write about black boys rather than black men because the destruction of black men does not occur upon their arrival into manhood or on their 18th birthday. This destruction begins when they are boys, and until we can pinpoint those years and what takes place, it will continue. I do not wish to ignore black men. I simply choose to focus on boys for numerous reasons. Firstly, correcting the problems of black boys may eliminate the problems for the future men. Secondly, it is considerably easier to educate, which is a one-step process, than it is to re-educate, which is a two-step process. Two of the most successful sports organizations, the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Dallas Cowboys, have consistently fielded good teams because they produced their players internally with one-step education rather than trading and buying older players, which necessitates a two-step orientation. I also do not wish to ignore black girls and women, nor start a debate over who is most oppressed. We both are oppressed. Rather, I intend to highlight one of the strategies, which is to destroy black boys before they become men. This places a greater burden on black women, who then must raise their children single-handedly, specifically raise their sons without a male model, and who must relate sexually to men cultivated within such a conspiratorial context. Fourth grade failure syndrome. Since 1974, I have been a national consultant to public and private schools, ranging from preschool through college. My responsibilities are to conduct workshops for teachers and parents and provide cultural assembly programs for children. It was during my travels that I recognized the conspiracy, often so subtle, as previously mentioned. Before I describe when the conspiracy worsens, I will describe the innocence of black boys who bring enthusiasm to the classroom, trust their teachers, and are so willing to please. Darryl, who had turned 5, has just completed 2 years of Head Start. His mother informed me that Darryl's only major regret about Head Start is that it lasted only 3 hours per day. But now, Darryl could not wait to see his new teacher, Miss Ford. She smiled at him often and helped him with his shoelaces. I guess the only regret he had about Miss Ford was that she insisted he eat his broccoli, which was not Darryl's favorite food. Darryl loved his classmates and enjoyed singing songs, playing in the sand, and listening to stories. Once, his classmate Richard was sad about an incident at home, and Darryl was quick to provide instant cheer. Darryl was an eager student. Miss Ford commented, "He asked so many questions." He loved the alphabet and numbers as much as he loved playing the dump trucks in the sand. Darryl enters the primary division of the neighborhood public school. Many important and tender moments occur in these formative years of kindergarten through 3rd grade. Darryl still sings, but not as loudly and with less enthusiasm. He likes all of his teachers, but each year a little less than before, and none compare with Miss Ford. The alphabet and numbers still interest him, but now the dump truck, his bicycle, and his football are his most important possessions. When I present cultural assembly programs to the children, Because of the limited seating capacity, I often conduct 2 or 3 programs for different grade levels in order that all the children will be able to attend. The primary divisions sing and recite louder and seem much happier than the intermediate and upper divisions. My experience has necessitated altering the program for the older divisions in consideration of their loss of innocence, enthusiasm, and trust. Third grade teachers often ask me what has happened to the Darrells and the Richards when they arrive in the upper divisions. I hesitated to answer that question because I do not consider myself a psychologist, but merely a man concerned about the future of his race. I sincerely feel much can be learned by listening to and observing children. I was amazed that teachers with 20 years' experience could not determine what happened to Darrell's and Richard's enthusiasm to learn, to trust, and their willingness to please. I wanted so much to learn from educators. The same holds true for the parents who, in contrast to the teachers, have the child for more than a year. Darrell's mother had witnessed her son's behavior in Head Start, kindergarten, 3rd grade, 8th grade, and all grades in between. Unfortunately, the parents seem unable to pinpoint when and articulate what happened to the innocence and enthusiasm for learning. Furthermore, if they knew the answers, they would be in a better position to alter the trend. I sought the answers from educators and parents because initially I did not know. The answers were not forthcoming, and my frustration grew with each city in which I witnessed the declining achievement of black boys. I began to respect the subtlety of the conspiracy and realized teachers and parents could live with it every day and not be cognizant of it. Again, this is why I focused on African American boys. The conspiracy is then in its early stages and can be treated. Harry Morgan notes in How Schools Fail Black Children, when blacks enter 1st grade, the stories they create express positive feelings about themselves in the schooling situation, but by the 2nd grade, students' stories express negative imagery of the teacher and school environment, and by the 5th grade, the overall feeling expressed by students is that of cynicism. In other words, upon entering school in primary grades, black children possess enthusiasm and eager interest. However, by 5th grade, the liveliness and interest are gone, replaced by passivity and apathy. Primary grades presented a more nurturing environment than intermediate or upper grades. In early childhood education, much of the activity is child-teacher centered and child-child interactive. In primary grades, blacks progress and thrive at the same rate as their white counterparts until the 3rd grade syndrome. I found after the 3rd grade, the achievement rate of blacks began a downward spiral which tended to continue in the child's academic career. The classroom environment was transformed from a socially interactive style to a competitive, individualistic, and minimally socially interactive style of learning. I call this the 4th grade failure syndrome. The poor transition boys make between the primary and intermediate division. Graphically illustrating this phenomenon is the following list of 20 male students' Iowa reading test scores indicating their performance at the beginning of the 3rd grade and 5 academic years later at the end of the 7th grade. My objective was to identify an African American public school with demographics matching the income and educational level of the African American community, along with family size. In addition, we also had to identify 20 random students who had remained in the same school all 5 years. I sincerely thank the principal and his staff for providing the sample for measurement. Reviewing the scores, 14 decreased, 4 improved, and 2 remained constant. The median beginning percentile was 52. The ending was 29. The median change in reading was 3.1 years. Only one child was able to improve his reading by 5 years or more during the sample period. There were 2 children who started at 98 and 92 and dropped to 35 and 24 respectively. We had 2 geniuses, only to lose them 5 years later. The boy who started at 63 and dropped to 4 could have stayed at home and watched Sesame Street. Dr. Nancy Arnaz, in her book, Implementation of Desegregation as a Discriminatory Process, reports, in 505 school districts in Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi, and Arkansas, which had classes for those labeled as educable mentally retarded, over 80% of the students so labeled were black, although less than 40% of the total school district was black. She further found that, although the bias-based IQ test was a major factor producing racial disproportions, the vulnerability of black children to the labeling process persisted into subsequent classification stages. The study indicated that disproportionately more of the, quote, eligible, end quote, black children were actually recommended for placement into special classrooms, while disproportionately fewer eligible white children were recommended for such placement. A large percentage of the black children in this study were found to be males. Additionally, several studies have found that although African Americans have significantly lower scores, the scores of African American males are demonstrably lower than those of African American females. Nathan Hare, in his sample of 10 and 11-year-olds, further found African American females to have outperformed their male counterparts on measures of achievement orientation. His investigations revealed a hierarchical academic performance structure in which Euro-American females in the middle and African American males lowest. The negative consequence for African American males is further highlighted in dropout and pushout statistics. African Americans constitute 15% of the total public school enrollment, yet were 21% of the dropouts, with African American males constituting the highest category. Thus, the pool of potential college-bound students is effectively reduced. In 1976, there were only 74 African American men with at least 4 years of college for every 100 African American women with equivalent credentials. Among college-bound high school seniors in 1978, there were only 66 African American males for every 100 females. An African American Child Care Conference conducted in September of 1981 in Columbus, Ohio, noted that in 1950, home had the greatest impact on children, followed closely by school, church, peer group, and television. In 1980, home remained number one, but peer group had moved into second position, followed closely by television, which is predicted to be number one in 1985, school and church. In a brief period, as 30 years, much has happened to the family structure. In review of the 1980 findings, looking at the home, 62% of all African American children live with a single parent. Considering television, we all should agree George Jefferson of the Jeffersons and J.J. Evans of Good Times are not the role models we need to defeat the conspiracy. The church has not been able to capture the minds of our youth, and specifically boys. I would hope concerned ministers and church members will look inward and ask themselves why youth and male youth specifically have not been attracted. I also urge that they study the success of the Nation of Islam, specifically the period under the leadership of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, of ancient African religions in which a distinction was made between religion and spirituality, and in which your source was inside you, with today, not tomorrow, being the greatest day of your life. Recent Equal Employment Opportunity Commission data revealed that 83% of all elementary school teachers in 1976 were females, while only 10.1% of this number were African American females. African American males constituted only 1.2% of the total 17% of elementary teachers who were males. Further, 45.7% of all full-time secondary school teachers were female, with African American females making up 5.1% of this total, and African American males accounting for 3.2% of the 54.3% male participation rate. When teacher aides were considered, the male-female imbalances increased. The EEOC data indicate that 95.5% of all teacher aides were female, with 20% of this number being African American. African American males accounted for 1.3% of the remaining 4.5% male teacher aides. Based on these figures, it could be concluded that a majority of African American males can spend an entire career in the public schools. Private schools are not very different, and have very little interaction with an African American male teacher, counselor, or administrator. During the past 8 years, speaking 6 times a week, my travels have not taken me to one male kindergarten teacher. Men normally enter the picture in the upper grades when the conspiracy is well underway. Men can usually be found as janitors, physical education teachers, or administrators. It is a positive experience to find male academic instructors, especially in the primary division. Furthermore, with so few male teachers, we can ill afford to lose any to homosexuality. More will be said about this complex subject in the following chapter. The complexity of the conspiracy goes beyond the lack of male teachers and a racist, irrelevant curriculum designed to maintain the status quo, training, versus problem-solving, education. It also includes the quality and continuity of the teaching staff. Many people are quick to declare public schools incapable of teaching African American children. I have been to many public schools where I witnessed some of the finest educational experiences, public or private. I made it a habit to visit the classrooms after conducting a workshop. In the same public schools that many of us are quick to denounce, I often experience different teaching styles and levels of competencies. How can we say public schools cannot educate our children when I visited a public school where a 5th grade teacher had 85% of her children reading above grade level, but more importantly, had them excited about learning? The problem cannot be easily solved with the condemnation of public schools, racism, or lack of male teachers. To pinpoint the problem, we must look at the continuity. The above teacher indicated to me that her students in the 4th grade last year were, quote, turned off, end quote, because their prior teacher did not care. She also indicated to me that she feared the choice between the 2 available 6th grade teachers boiled down to the lesser of two evils. Parents often inform me how superlative their children's previous teacher was, but during the current year, this is not the case. Principals are also quick to mention who are their stalwarts. This scenario is completed by the comments from the children about which teachers care. What I received from these encounters is that all four groups, children, parents, teachers, and administrators, recognize quality. Therefore, you are a member of the conspiracy if you allow a child to sit in a classroom one extra day with an unconcerned teacher. Principals have informed me that they place their best teachers, including men, in the upper grades where the most undisciplined children are, to maintain order. This band-aid approach is part of the conspiracy. It should appear obvious that if you stop the problem in the primary division, you will not have this problem migrating to the upper grades. When I have shared this observation, the response has been, "But what will we do in the meantime with the upper grade children?" The solution then would be to make the staff changes and accept and live with the problem for 3 years until all those upper grades graduated. The problem is magnified with desegregation when inner city schools, in desperation to achieve racial balance, allow a disproportionate number of non-black teachers to teach in the primary division. While this is occurring, some of the better upper grade teachers of all races become increasingly frustrated, suffer from teacher burnout, and contemplate retirement. I cajole more teachers to remain with each passing year. The problem can be minimized when public school parents realize the prime difference between them and private school parents is that one pays directly and the other through taxes. Schools still belong to parents, and if parents recognize qualitative differences in their teachers and are not satisfied, they can organize with other parents to either have the teacher removed or keep their children home. As a result, the school will lose money and be forced to remove the teacher. I have also seen concerned, creative teachers develop arrangements with their principals through which they ensure continuity by placing their most competent teachers in the primary division. The fastest and greatest influence on most male youth are the streets. There is a direct correlation between age and street time. The transition from the primary division to the intermediate and upper division parallels the increased street time. Street time increases as male youth become older, because most parents spend less time and give more freedom to their children. Eugene Perkins, in his book, Home is a Dirty Secret, paints the picture. Summer mornings never appear to change. They quickly become a part of ghetto colony tradition, a pervasive episode of hopelessness and poverty. What was true yesterday is more than likely to be true today. There are the same decrepit structures basking under the sun, with their frayed window shades half drawn, and the odor of hominy grits, fried pork, and burnt toast seeping out into the almost death-like air. On hot days, one can see fatigued ebony faces protruding out of windows to gain relief from the morning humidity, and the stenchy alleys covered with broken wine bottles, empty beer cans, urine, and the feces of stray dogs and unwanted people, and the weary people waiting on street corners to catch the crowded buses which take them to work, and the school-aged children who leave home before they have eaten breakfast, and the whimpers of babies who are still hungry from yesterday's shortage of milk, and the dispossessed men who mill in front of taverns waiting to quench their hunger with anything that can help them escape their pain and frustration, and the hustlers, pimps, street men, and other social outcasts who serve as models for the young, and the blue squadron flashing down the street, or the blaring of a fire truck answering a call of distress. And there are the dirty streets, always the dirty streets where ghetto colony children make their home. A home that has an asphalt floor, tenements for its walls, and a door which locks them in from the rest of the world. The streets constitute an institution in the same way that the church, school, and family are conceived as institutions. They all have a set of values and norms to govern and reinforce their existence. Of course, the social structure of the street lacks the sophistication these other institutions have. Nevertheless, it is an institution because it helps to shape and control behavior. And it is on the streets where the black child received his basic orientation to life. The streets become his primary reference because other institutions have failed to provide him with the essential skills he needs to survive in the ghetto colony. And for a child to survive the ghetto colony, he must undergo a rigorous apprenticeship that will enable him to compensate for the lack of guidance from other institutions and adults. He becomes a student of the asphalt jungle because that is where he can learn the skills he needs. When black children are not compelled to attend school, and often when they are, they usually can be found in the streets. The streets become their text, instructor, and subject matter. The curriculum for this asphalt institution incorporates many of the same courses that are found in the formal school setting: sociology, political science, history, biology, and even the physical sciences. However, unlike the school, the courses in the street institution are structured around community norms and are more binding on its members. Its sociology consists of studying the so-called pathology of the ghetto. Political science is learned from the unscrupulous exploits of corrupt politicians. History from years of discrimination and economic deprivation. Biology from youths smoking marijuana and having sex in dirty alleys. And the physical sciences are taught by learning how to endure elements unfit for human consumption. And the theoretical references for the street institution reflect how the people actually live and not how others would like them to function. There are no semester breaks or summer vacations, for study in the ghetto colony is a continuous cycle which never stops, not even in the face of death. The values of the street institution are shaped from the physical and psychological manifestations of the ghetto colony. From these manifestations, certain lifestyles are created that are exemplified by the instructors of the street institution. The instructors consist of hustlers, pimps, street men, militants, gang leaders, and working men. And though these men do not have master's and PhD degrees, their credentials have been earned from actual experiences and not from the sterile laboratories of formal academic institutions. The fourth grade failure syndrome has been targeted as a pivotal year in the conspiracy to destroy black boys. This transition from the primary grade to the intermediate and upper grades has many implications. The decline in male performance can be attributed to less than desired teacher competency in the primary division, few male teachers, parental apathy, increased peer pressure, and greater emphasis on mass media. The high performance level of black boys in the primary division is not the result of quality teaching, but natural raw ability. The poor development of this ability is illustrated in their lack of enthusiasm to learn, low self-esteem, and poor self-discipline, and is manifested, not created, in upper grades. In conclusion, it is very difficult to be a man if you do not see positive male role models. African American boys who do not receive quality instruction, do not have a father present, nor male teachers, nor a conspiracy-conscious African American minister, are left with incompetent teachers, apathetic parents, mass media, and the streets. We are at war for the minds of our boys. we are attempting to defeat the conspiracy. The Darrells of the world deserve an opportunity to grow and develop into manhood. Male seasoning. Sekou Touré, president of Guyana, described a certain form of seasoning, the science of dehumanization, the process of indoctrinating you against yourself, the denial of internal development for external reward. This chapter takes a look at men in general and African American men specifically. The poor communication skills, decline in academic interest, and weak emotional development may be linked to the male seasoning process. First, let us ask the question, what is a man? Goldberg, in his book, Hazards of Being Male, comments, an independent, strong achiever who can be counted on to be always in control. His success in the working world is predicated on the repression of self and the display of a controlled, deliberate, calculated, manipulative responsiveness. The man who feels becomes inefficient because he gets emotionally involved, and this inevitably slows him down and distracts him. His more dehumanized competition will then surely pass him by. Michael Brown provides a criteria held by most African American male youth in Image of a Man. How much pain or violence you can inflict on another person. How many girls you can impregnate and not get married. How much reefer you can smoke, pills you can drop, and wine you can drink. How many times you can go to jail and come out unrehabilitated. What kind of clothes you wear. How much money you have. What kind of car you drive. To the above, I will add the classics. Men do not cry, ignore health symptoms, must bring home the bacon, and do not display affection to anyone, especially their sons. Much debate has taken place over the last decade concerning the significance of biological and sociological factors contributing to male development. Physiologically, males have X and Y chromosomes, while females have X chromosomes. Males possess the hormone testosterone, while the female hormone is estrogen. The chemical makeup of the male body is 40% muscle, 15% fat. A woman's is 23% muscle and 25% fat. These differences have given some researchers the rationale for explaining why men are more aggressive and excel in math, while women are passive and excel in communication. The debate becomes heated when other researchers state society's role in encouraging aggression and math in boys, and passivity and communication in girls. The images of John Wayne, Rocky, and men dominating the fields of math and science provide role models which perpetuate the myth. Roger Brown, in his article Social Psychology, paints the picture. In the United States, a real boy climbs trees, disdains girls, dirties his knees, plays with soldiers, and takes blue for his favorite color. A real girl dresses dolls, jumps rope, plays hopscotch, and takes pink for her favorite color. When they go to school, real girls like English and music and auditorium. Real boys prefer manual training, gym, and arithmetic. In college, the boys smoke pipes, drink beer, and major in engineering or physics. The girls chew juicy fruit gum, drink cherry cokes, and major in fine arts. The real boy matures into a man's man who plays poker, goes hunting, drinks brandy, and dies in the war. The real girl becomes a feminine woman who loves children, embroiders handkerchiefs, drinks weak tea, and succumbs to consumption. My experience has taught me that very little, if any, research is objective. The researcher brings to the subject his or her values and frames of reference. His story is just that, someone's story about what happened. I originally sought to prove biologically why males are aggressive, which would explain why boys receive disproportionately harsh treatment in schools. I found literature documenting study after study to confirm biologically why males behave in a certain manner. I also found just as much literature either refuting the biological significance or raising doubts about the denial of sociological factors. It is my opinion that because the two factors, nature and nurture, cannot be separated for laboratory investigation, the debate is futile. I also feel that while many researchers believe testosterone increased aggression in males, and I do not remove the possibility, honest researchers must admit the sexist environment has clearly prescribed roles for men and women which perpetuate the myths. This debate is similar to the left brain, right brain controversy, whereby the left hemisphere is very analytical and excels in math and science, while the right hemisphere is holistic and excels in communication, fine arts, and sports. In private academic circles, the notion exists that Europeans, and specifically men, are more left-brain oriented, and people of color, specifically women, are more right-brain oriented. The myth becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if parents, teachers, counselors, and mass media provide the reinforcement. How can you separate biological theory from the social environment where it is manifested? The myths that African Americans are lazy, lack initiative, are super sexy, love to dance, sing, and play basketball become self-fulfilling if role models and encouragement are not provided in other areas by parents, educators, and community advocates. Parents are often the perpetuators of male seasoning by patterning their household to fit the sexist mold. Female parents, who are well aware of the lack of male support, often can be found rearing their male child where little household responsibilities are required. Many boys continue to reach manhood with little skill and less interest in cooking and cleaning. Parents, educators, and community advocates do little to reinforce the male child who has interest in the fine arts, religion, and reading. There is a popular rumor that, quote, mothers raise their daughters and love their sons, end quote. The word raise means to develop a child to become economically, emotionally, and domestically self-sufficient. But love is given with little or no expectations, conditions, or responsibilities. Some mothers demand less academic achievement, maturity, and household chores from their sons than from their daughters. Boys are also allowed later street hours, sexual permissiveness, and more athletic pursuits than their female counterpart. It is very difficult to be economically, emotionally, and domestically self-sufficient if academic mediocrity, non-attendance at spiritual activities, minimal intimate communication, and exemption from household tasks is condoned. Self-sufficiency and manhood become less achievable when mothers inform their young sons as early as 6 years of age that they are now, quote, the man of the house, end quote. The tremendous pressure of trying to be the man of the house with no training or example is unfair and unnecessary. In addition, this same child who is now the man of the house may become jealous, threatened, and disapproving of all his mother's male friends, and ultimately become a man you can't discipline. On the other hand, mothers often raise their daughters to be academically aggressive, with the honor roll being the major objective, which leads to their having more career opportunities. Many daughters are taught not only to be economically self-sufficient, but even when married, to always keep a little of yourself. The mandatory attendance of worship service and the intimacy established between mother and daughter and her friends help to develop an emotionally secure person. Even though the value of housework has been declining, girls continue to enter adult relationships with a marked proficiency over their male counterparts, both in skill and attitude. The difference in child-rearing practices of sons and daughters has important implications for adult male-female relationships. Men may enter these relationships with less academic, economic, emotional, and domestic skills. They may expect women to love them unconditionally and to be as loyal to them as their mother. Women who saw their mothers do everything without a man will be aggressive and more academically accomplished, as well as emotionally and domestically self-sufficient. She would like for her man to demonstrate these same qualities, but because of the way she has been raised as opposed to the male track record, she often feels that it is in her best interest to keep a little money on the side, just in case. Janice Hale, in her book, Black Children, postulates, traditional classrooms are generally oriented toward feminine values. Teachers are disproportionately female, and the behaviors tolerated and encouraged are those that are more natural for girls. Black males perfect a special walk, place value on being cool, cultivate distinctive handshakes and slang, share common manhood rights, playing the dozens, wolfing, fighting, and vying for sports prowess, and socialize each other into characteristic approaches toward authority figures and women. An important manhood right in the black community is playing the dozens. This is an activity primarily by males in which usually two opponents duel verbally. They make derogatory comments about each other and each other's family members, usually the mother. The performance of each player is appreciated and judged by the group who urges them on. This is called a manhood right because it serves an important function. The boy must master several important competencies in order to be a good player. First of all, he must control his emotions. Here, in the presence of his friends, terribly derogatory statements are made about his mother, who is dear to him. He must suppress his emotional reaction to what has been said so that he can think quickly and counter with an even more clever slur upon his opponent's mother. I contend that controlling one's emotion is a process emphasized in the socialization of black males. They actually share a subculture within the black community. The teacher in a model classroom would be sensitive to many ways in which black maleness is rejected in traditional classrooms. For example, when black male children volley verbally in an aggressive, threatening manner, some teachers who don't understand black culture may interpret their behavior as fighting, when actually they are woofing, a verbal ritual that relieves tension in lieu of a fight. My investigation cannot state, then, that the reason boys, and specifically African Americans, perform lower than their counterparts is because they possess testosterone, which produces aggression. I can say unequivocally that our present society encourages males to release their aggression in contact sports such as football and boxing. Boys learn very early that disagreements can be settled with fists, while male-dominated governments clarify their disagreements with other nations via war. It is hard to imagine the tremendous amount of pressure on approximately 10% of the world's population, European men, who have the desire to rule the world. There are 4.3 billion people in the world, of which 3.4 billion have color. Only 900 million, I am being generous with the UN estimates, lack color, or 20%. For the sake of simple math, I divided the 20% in half, while in actuality there are more European women than men. Perhaps we cannot imagine, having been oppressed for so long, the tremendous burden assumed in running the world. To be a world runner, you must be macho. You must die with your boots on. You must never display emotion, never drop a tear. How can you run the world crying? On Monday Night Football, the football superstar Earl Campbell goes off the field with an injured knee, only to return later in the game to the announcer's cry, "Oh, what a man!" The recent popular movie Making Love illustrates why the swelling number of homosexual men has reached an estimated 20 million in the United States. Both men in the movie shared their childhood experiences and their desire to be nurtured by a man, preferably their father. Unfortunately, men are not supposed to show affection and compassion to their sons who need to be trained as future world runners. One man described his little league baseball experience in which his father worked with him all season on his hitting, and in the big game brought his friends to watch his boy. The son did an excellent job at the plate, but late in the game a fly ball in the right field was dropped. The father forgot to teach him how to catch. The father did not talk to him for a week and said he was too embarrassed to go to the office. Imagine the effect on the boy's psyche. Irreparable damage, making him a prime candidate for homosexuality, as he still yearns for male companionship. I also advocate that this skeleton macho image of a man is a leading contributor to lesbianism. Can you imagine what happens to a little girl's psyche after being sexually abused by a sick man? Have we reached a point wherein men and women can no longer talk to each other with warmth and admiration? A recent article in a feminist magazine commented that men listen less to women than to each other, and women have a greater chance for a conversation if they discuss what men initiate or if they talk to other women. From both ends of the continuum, men seem to be blocked when they try to relate to each other. That is, they are not comfortable sharing their downsides, their failures, anxieties, and disappointments. Perhaps they fear being seen as weak, complaining losers or crybabies, a perception that threatens their masculine images. Neither do they seem to feel comfortable sharing their ecstasies or successes for fear of inciting competitive jealousies or appearing boastful. Consequently, verbal social interactions between men focus on neutral, largely impersonal subject matters such as automobiles, sports, and politics. Goldberg explains why being a male can be hazardous for your health. When a man's self is hidden from everybody else, it seems also to become much hidden even from himself, and it permits disease and death to gnaw into his substance without his clear knowledge. Autism, the severest form of childhood schizophrenia, runs 3 to 4 times as high for boys. In state and county mental hospital units for children, boys outnumber girls by approximately 150%. Under the age of 15, males are diagnosed as schizophrenics 42% more frequently than girls. Though there are approximately 105 male babies conceived for every 100 females in the population at large, there are today approximately 95 males for every 100 females. From birth on, the rate of attrition is significantly higher for the male. There are approximately 115 male fetal deaths for every 100 female fetal deaths. At nearly every age level, from birth to death, the male mortality rate is significantly higher. Specifically, from birth to age 1, the male death rate is 33% higher. From age 15 through 19, male death rate is more than 150% higher. From age 20 to 24, the male death rate is 200% higher, and at almost all age levels after that, male death rate is about 100% higher or twice as high as that of females. Today, the difference in life expectancy is 8 years and increasing. 69.9 years white men versus 77.8 white women. European men need to recognize, for their own sakes, that the sole running of the world is not beneficial for their health, self-esteem, or relationships with family and friends. It is unnatural for 20% of the population, actually the 10% that are men, to want to control the world. Robert Mugabe does not want to control the world. He wants to administer Zimbabwe. Julius Nyerere does not want to control the world. He wants to administer Tanzania. I believe this is correct, and justice will prevail. Unfortunately, Gil Scott-Heron, in his album Reflections, may be right when he says America was looking for its hero, and since John Wayne was no longer available, they settled for Ronald Reagan. It is equally unfortunate that African American men take their example of manhood from white men. Some African American men wish to dominate their women as Europeans dominate theirs, but because they do not hire and fire, do not control the means of production, they become aspiring chauvinists. Their dominance is expressed in 82,000 rapes reported in the U.S. in 1981, or as Michael Brown indicated, how much pain they can inflict, women they can impregnate, reefers they can smoke, clothes they wear, cars they drive, money they have, and how many times they can be released from jail unrehabilitated. African American men, like European men, are taught to be aggressive, to not cry, show little emotion and affection toward male children, ignore health symptoms, and continue to bring home the bacon. African American men, though, have a difficult time bringing home the bacon, in contrast to their European counterparts. African American adult male unemployment hovers at 25%, and teenage unemployment is soaring to 75%, with a strong possibility that some will never work. Imagine what it is like in a male-controlled world to not be able to bring home the bacon. Is there any worse conspiracy than to miseducate African American boys so they will never compete in the economy? Liebau, in his book Tally's Corner, responds, "The way in which the man makes a living and the kind of living he makes have important consequences for how the man sees himself and is seen by others, and these in turn importantly shape his relationships with family members, lovers, friends, and neighbors. Making a living takes on an overriding importance at marriage. Although he wants to get married, he hedges his commitment from the very beginning because he is afraid not of marriage itself, but of his own ability to carry out his responsibilities as a husband and father. His own father failed and had to cut out, and the men he knows who have been or are married have also failed or are in the process of doing so. He has no evidence that he will not. The black menial worker remains a menial worker so that after 1 or 2 or 3 years of marriage and as many children, the man who could not support his family from the very beginning is even less able to support it as time goes on. The longer he works, the longer he is unable to live on what he makes. He has little vested interest in such a job and learns to treat it with the same contempt held for it by the employer and society at large. From his point of view, the job is expendable. From the employer's point of view, he is. Sometimes he sits down and cries at the humiliation of it all. Sometimes he strikes out at her or the children with his fists, perhaps to lay hollow claim to being man of the house in the one way left open to him, or perhaps simply to inflict pain on this woman who bears witness to his failure as a husband and father and therefore as a man. Increasingly, he turns to the street corner where a shadow system of values constructed out of public fictions serve to accommodate just such men as he, permitting them to be men once again, provided they do not look too closely at one another's credentials. Johns Hopkins Research Center reported in 1981 that for every 1% increase in unemployment, there is a 4.3% increase in mental patients, 4.1% increase in suicide, 5.7% increase in murders, 4.0% increase in prisoners. The leading killers of African American men are heart disease, cancer, homicide, accidents, and suicide, respectively. African American boys outnumber African American girls 1.03 to 1 at birth. But upon reaching their 18th birthday, available women outnumber available men 1.8 to 1. The life expectancy of African American men is 65.5, European men 69.9, African American women 74.5, and European women 77.8. These figures have much significance. African American men die before anybody else. European women live 12 years longer. African American women spend the last 10 years of their lives without their men, if their men are at home. Legislation is being considered to eliminate African American men from contributing to Social Security because they usually would not live to receive it. Male seasoning thus becomes a dehumanization process of indoctrinating you against yourself, a conspiracy designed to make you a skeleton with no feelings and compassion for your children, women, or brothers. Psychologists have proven that expressing emotions can alleviate suicidal tendencies. Men returning home from work or never going, sitting in rocking chairs with a beer all evening, never fully sharing with their spouse or children how they feel. Men have become slaves to bringing home the bacon and letting mama bring home the emotion. It has often been said being a man in America is very difficult, but I strongly advocate that we redefine manhood. Goldberg and Brown's description is not in our best interest. How can we build strong families and nations with a group of people who have not developed themselves internally? I believe being a man may be best expressed by telling your wife, "I appreciate you," by bringing your son to your chest, and by telling your fellow brothers when you are hurting and need their help. Counter-conspiracy strategies. The objective of this book has been to pinpoint why, when, and how African American boys are denied the skills necessary for manhood, and what strategies can be developed to negate the conspiracy and enhance African American male development. We are involved in a cultural struggle. Culture is more than your music, dress, or the food you eat. Culture is everything you do. It's your lifestyle, which results from the way you perceive yourself within the context of the world. A part of our culture should be the successful transition from boyhood to manhood. One measure of cultural success can be defined as securing a high ratio of boys making this transition. We must develop cultural strategies, changes in our lifestyle which achieve this objective. I sincerely believe that only men can develop boys into men. Please do not misquote or misinterpret. I did not say a single female parent could not develop her son into a man, but she does not need to attempt such a significant act alone. African American social scientists were quick to refute Moynihan's position that African American families lacked male input by illustrating our extended family tradition. 62% of our children are reared by single parents, but very few families receive no input from a male figure, i.e. grandfather, father, brother, uncle, nephew, cousin, neighbor, lover, or friend. While social scientists were theoretically correct to negate Moynihan's analysis, until we consciously utilize our extended family tradition to eradicate the conspiracy, to whose benefit is its existence? Very few African American women are consciously aware that their son needs a positive male role model, that the family, streets, television, school, and church institutions come up lacking, and that a concerted effort between them and a male extended family member must actively fill the void. Until African American women admit that only men can make boys into men, and African American men become responsible for giving direction to at least one male child, the conspiracy will continue. Every concerned African American man should ask himself if he is providing some positive direction to at least one male child. Concerned administrators, teachers, and parents should solicit men to speak in the schools that sorely lack a male presence. I don't mean asking celebrities such as Andrew Young and Jesse Jackson, but your local bus driver, mailman, etc., who in his own way is trying to be consistent. Hopefully this will not only inspire male children, but motivate African American men to become more responsible. African American men, especially teachers, should offer to teach at least 1 year in the primary division. Librarians and teachers should make available as much literature as possible about African American male achievements, particularly outside the professions of entertainment and sports. Thomas Gordon in The Black Adolescent notes that in an African culture, community is preeminent and membership is the foundation for existence. In Africa, the young adult does not break with childhood any more than animal species do. True enough, the African youth must explore and experiment with new urges and roles, negotiate new sexual and public status, consolidate peer bonds, and take steps to settle into a work and family situation of his own. Still, the critical consideration in the African view remains the community focus or preeminence. The Western mode or perspective, with awesome implications for mental illness and adolescent stress, teaches us a reality of individual aspiration, material accumulation, technological complexity, frantic upward mobility, and the rhetoric of personal liberty. In the West, the Euro-American rarely expects to produce healthy, happy children only under the auspices of the nuclear family concept. This assumption is preposterous. An adult family cannot and never will provide complete nurturing, communicative, and recuperative powers to meet the full needs of young children. The nuclear and single family, organized for mobility, provides its children with things and events and accelerating experiences, but relatively little community or connection. We are child-focused in what and how much we give to children, but typically poor architects and building for their wider connection and support. Television and public daycare are the West's rejoinder to African community and connection. African American men need to recognize now how a little concern and attention paid to boys may make the difference between becoming a man or remaining a boy. America's propaganda is quick to sell us on blaming the victim and to determine the system exempt. We are quick to argue, "I had to pull myself up by my bootstraps." America's propaganda, and specifically capitalism, has developed a game where 10 people play, but only one wins. The prize can only be big if there are fewer winners. If the 9 players ever assessed their situations and either did not participate or change the rules, the game would end. A sophisticated marketing apparatus continued to provide the illusion that at some point you will win. Why would we allow ourselves to play a game that theoretically has more losers than winners? This system is an illustration of culture, but it is not historically African. African American men who have made it in this competitive, individualistic environment need to show compassion for their younger brothers who are not as fortunate for more complex reasons than their own lack of initiative. I was blessed to have one of the finest fathers any son could have, but had it not been for my track coach and Haki Madhubuti showing interest in me, I could have possibly been destroyed. My transition from elementary school to high school was a rocky one. In my first semester, I received all D's and F's after being an honor student in elementary school. My track coach inspired me to improve my grades and gave me the determination to run. His favorite saying was, "Anybody can run when they're fresh. Can you run when you're tired?" I have used that same philosophy every time I began to weaken in other areas. Haki Madhubuti inspired me to work for black people. Many boys have completed the transition to manhood via the encouragement of a coach. The structural challenge here is that boys must excel in more than athletics, and we must diversify our leadership. The dichotomy between athletics and academics has reached national attention. An episode of the TV show 60 Minutes reported that 3 athletes were suing a California university for not providing them an education. When the athletes were asked what they did the 4 years they were playing, they answered that they were determining what pro team they would join and how to spend the 6-figure salary. These athletes were serious. They had it all planned except for the remote possibility of not being drafted by a pro team. A simple math example that I share in cultural assembly programs paints the picture. Suppose there are 20 teams in the NBA with 10 players on each team, making a total of 200 positions. Let us also suppose that ball players the caliber of Julius Erving and Magic Johnson choose to keep their positions next year, along with 178 other good ball players, leaving a total of 20 positions for new college entries. And finally, that there are 10,000 athletes that play very well in high school or college. Let us now suppose 10,000 high technological positions will be available for people of color, and there will be 1,000 qualified African American graduates. Which career contains the highest possibility of attainment? 10,000 athletes, plus much more playing alley ball, looking for 20 athletic positions, or 1,000 applicants choosing from 10,000 technological positions. I have witnessed creative principals highlight academics over athletics with pep rallies after each marking period. The principals realized the impact pep rallies have on self-esteem and wanted to glorify academic achievement. This approach is vitally needed to refute the image boys have of academic achievement. Boys often want to measure competency physically and label academic proficiency as being for sissies. A recent study of 12,000 students produced some interesting findings along this line. The researchers correlated masculinity scores of the boys on the California Psychological Inventory with their school grades. She found that the higher the boy scored on the masculine scale, the lower his report card average tended to be. Of the 277 students with a D or F average, 60% were boys. Of the 2 boys with the most distinguished scholastic records, one was noted to be markedly effeminate in speech and gesture, while the other gave the strong impression of being more feminine than effeminate. Both boys had very low scores in physical fitness. It has become frustrating and embarrassing to speak at graduations where there are fewer males present with each step, elementary, high school, and college, but equally depressing to witness 10 girls as the top students. But more importantly, is Magic Johnson prepared academically to become a U.S. Senator like the former New York Knickerbocker Bill Bradley, or a congressman like the former Buffalo Bill Jack Kemp? I recommended to elementary school principals the Special Olympics to curb fighting. As mentioned previously, boys solve most of their problems with their fists rather than their mind. A major reason for their fighting is to stroke their self-esteem. The object of the Special Olympics is to use this competitive desire but expand the areas of competencies without physically hurting a child. As soon as children are found fighting, immediately break the fight, but allow them to measure their physical capabilities in ways not detrimental to one another. This may take the form of push-ups, pull-ups, Indian wrestling, running, weightlifting, etc. Upon completion of the physical component, move to the mental exercise, which may include spelling or math computations. Conduct the event as a public spectacle where academics can be revered as athletics. I recommend the elimination of the physical component when time does not permit, or in special cases where boys need further appreciation of mental activities. My experience has shown that the bullies reduce fighting in fear of being embarrassed in front of their peers because of poor academic skills. In addition, the Special Olympics tackles the myth that being smart is for sissies. We want to convey that being a man takes more than muscles. It also takes brains. The second greatest formative impact on youth, as mentioned earlier, is the streets. Every effort should be made to reduce street time. Explain the dangers of the streets and program challenging and constructive activities for the peer group. Concerned parents should know their children's friends and invite them to their house. Parents are quick to say, television is destroying the minds of our children, and I can't keep up with the boy when he goes outside. My response is, as powerful as ABC, CBS, and NBC are, they cannot force you to turn your television set on. If television is a problem, it is because you are not controlling your household. If the streets are a problem, it is because you are not controlling your child's schedule. Children cannot raise themselves, and parents should not allow television or the streets to try. Conscientious parents create activities to replace television viewing. A single parent is different from single parenting. Single parenting assumes the entire burden. Conscientious single parents enroll their child in martial arts, little league, carpentry, band, etc. Concerned parents realize their children want to interact with their peer groups, but what they do should receive your input. My extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, and friends exposed me very early to the dangers of the streets, with functional field trips to drug abuse centers, jails, and neighborhood hospitals on Friday evenings. The experiences are memorable to this day and have enhanced my desire to have a lifestyle free of dope and crime. The business community could benefit from a reduction of street time. Black businesses are saddled with higher costs because of vandalism, inventory shrinkage, and employing additional security. Sales decline because the streets are not safe for customers. Businesses could help their plight by employing a teenager, if for nothing more than 5 to 10 hours per week. This short-term expense may pay handsome long-term benefits with less inventory shrinkage, reduction of armed guards, and increased sales due to safe streets. Businesses should take full advantage of publicity to inform the African American community of their intentions. Black businesses should remove the attitude that they are doing the customer a favor with their existence and express their concern for their customers. Some European Americans may be racist, but most show their satisfaction with your patronage. I am also a strong advocate of youth volunteering their services to learn necessary skills. One summer, I chose to volunteer with an electrical firm. The employer could not believe I wanted to volunteer, and I imagine his shock motivated his approval. During my internship, I began to receive bus money and a small salary, but more importantly, I learned the mechanics of electricity that will last a lifetime. Conclusion: we must develop programs and organizations to protect and develop African American boys because a conspiracy exists to destroy African American boys. The motive of the conspiracy is racism, specifically European American male supremacy. The conspiracy has become more complex when oftentimes the perpetrators reside in the home and in the classroom. It is most destructive between the primary and intermediate grades. The method is to eliminate positive male role models, discourage emotional and spiritual development, de-emphasize academics while the technology becomes more complex. The similarities between the development of African American and European American boys are that both groups are encouraged to be aggressive and develop the body, but European American boys have more positive male models, especially at home, on television, and in the business community. The major difference between African American and European American boys is European American men run the world. Therefore, European American boys will be taken care of, as best exemplified by the fact that a European American man possessing a high school diploma earns more than a European American woman, African American man, and woman possessing a college degree. We need organizations to protect and develop African American boys similar to big brothers. This one-to-one relationship provides the intimacy our boys should have received from their fathers. A very respected minister in Chicago, Father Clements, advocated that we redefine manhood and stated, quote, "Boys make babies while men rear them," end quote. With this definition, I wonder how many males could be considered men. Big brothers and fathers must remove the notion that the only time to interact with your boys is on formal outings, i.e. ball games, amusement parks, and picnics, and they must appreciate that boys need to know what to do when they are out on the streets. Boys could learn so much more watching positive role models in the barbershop, repairing your car, on the job, or visiting friends. The organization I recommend is more formal, including more boys with a program providing skill development and recreation. The program is very similar to the Boy Scouts with two major differences. The first is ideological. The political, historical persuasion of the Boy Scouts is the maintenance of the status quo, which in America is European American male supremacy. The rites of passage program's major thrust is to equip African American boys ideologically with the tools to understand why Africans are oppressed, and specifically African American boys. If this objective is not met, the conspiracy will continue. In order to resist, you must first know what you're resisting. The second major difference is the distinction between self-directed learning and training. Boy Scouts, like most schools, train African American children. There are fundamental differences between training and education. If you are trained, you become the employee. If you are educated, you become the employer. If you are trained, you have a job, if you're lucky. If you are educated, you have a career. If you are trained, you have been taught to memorize. If you are educated, you have been taught how to think. The Boy Scouts train boys to maintain America. The Rites of Passage program educates boys to remove the injustices of racism, capitalism, sexism, and to fuel liberation and the maximization of human potential. Rites of Passage program. 1. Organize a group of black men willing to participate in the program. 2. Develop study sessions with the above group discussing black history and male development. Recommended titles are Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, Black Masculinity, Home is a Dirty Street, Black Men, Hazards of Being a Male, Autobiography of Malcolm X, Tally's Corner, Miseducation of the Negro, Destruction of Black Civilization, There is a River, and The Choice. 3. Identify a facility, frequency, and the length of the meeting with the young brothers. Age is discretionary. 4. Objectives of the program should provide skill development, black history, male socialization, recreation, and a big brother. 5. Recommended structure would be weekly, with 1 week allocated to a field trip, black history, skill development, and rites of passage, male socialization. 6. Field trips should include prison, drug abuse center, teenage pregnancy center, public hospital emergency room on a Saturday evening, best high school honors class, stock market, camping, and computer-oriented businesses. In summary, the following are some counter-conspiracy strategies. For parents: 1. Secure knowledge about the conspiracy. 2. Monitor your child's classroom. 3. Utilize the extended family to increase male availability. 4. Provide literature about black male accomplishments. 5. Reduce street time. 6. Program the peer group with constructive activities sponsored by community organizations. 7. Administrate household responsibilities. 8. Reduce television viewing and video games, and increase family communication and recreation. 9. Identify a church addressing the needs of youth. 10. Proper nutrition, both prenatal and postnatal. For educators: increase male exposure and class visitation in the primary division. 2. Increase teacher competency in the primary division. 3. Develop a problem-solving curriculum, education versus memorizing and the maintenance of the status quo, training. 4. Emphasize academic over athletic achievement. 5. Provide literature about black male accomplishments. I believe we will win. Life remains very simple by providing only 2 choices: despair or faith. If we give up, we automatically lose. Only if we dare to struggle do we dare to win. Pledge on Black Manhood. I am the black man. Some know me as Imhotep, Ramses, Martin, or Malcolm. Others know me as the brother on the corner or in jail. I am both Detroit Red and Malcolm. From this day forward, I pledge my life to the liberation of my people. I will put God first in my life. Black women will feel safe when they see me. I will be a supportive, responsible, and loving husband. I will hug, talk, and listen to and educate my children. I will be involved in the Scouts, role model, and rites of passage. Why? Because I am the black man, the original man, the one and only, the one that other men are afraid of, because they know whenever I've been given the opportunity, I succeed. Jawanza, Kunjufu. End of Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. Read by Exam Info.